I was folding my old red sweater, the one with the tiny reindeer buttons, when I first heard Jenna say it. Christmas should be fun this year, not depressing, she whispered to one of her friends on the phone, thinking I was in my room. I stood in the hallway, hidden by the shadow, clutching that sweater like a shield from another life. At 72, you learn when not to interrupt, when to let people show you who they really are. My name is Evelyn, and I've lived in this house longer than my daughter-in-law has been alive. It still smells like cinnamon and lemon polish when I clean, like it did when my late husband, Robert, was here. Back then, family meant respect, not convenience. But this Christmas, Jenna and her friends had a different definition of fun. Later that evening, my son Mark came into the kitchen, avoiding eye contact like a boy caught stealing cookies. "Mom, Jenna's planning something special for Christmas this year," he said, scratching the back of his neck. I stirred the pot of soup and watched the steam rise, pretending not to notice his discomfort. "Special?" I asked, with that sweet tone older women perfect over time. He nodded quickly, like he wanted to get it over with. "Yeah, her friends are coming, and we thought we'd try something new. More our age, you know? Our age." As if I was a ghost that had accidentally overstayed my welcome. I just smiled and said, "Of course, dear. Christmas is for everyone." The next days were a parade of boxes, laughter, and whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Jenna decorated the tree with her friends, using pale, minimalist ornaments that looked like they belonged in a hotel lobby. My old handmade decorations, the ones Mark painted as a child, sat in a dusty plastic bin in the corner. I watched them string lights and take selfies, their phones lighting up more than the tree itself. Sometimes, one of them would toss me a polite smile, the kind you give a stranger on the bus. "Evelyn, could you hand me the tape?" Jenna would ask, not looking me in the eye. I handed it to her and noticed how she carefully avoided brushing my fingers. To them, I wasn't family. I was background. Yet I'm not as fragile as I look. Age may bend your back, but it sharpens your mind if you let it. I started to notice patterns, the private group chats, the sudden stops in conversation when I entered. The way Mark's face tightened whenever Christmas was mentioned, as if he held a secret he didn't agree with. I watched everything, quietly like I used to in my old job, before anyone in this house knew who I used to be. They thought they were just planning a party. They were actually planning a test of my dignity. And they had no idea how badly they were about to fail it. One night, I passed by the living room and heard Jenna's friend Brianna giggle. "Would be hilarious. Imagine the look on her face," she said. They all laughed, high-pitched and careless, like schoolgirls who'd never buried a husband or lost a child. I leaned against the wall, fingers pressing into the paint, feeling the truth settle into my bones. This Christmas wasn't about family or love or even fun. It was about cruelty dressed up as a joke. And they were planning to make me the punchline. The only thing they forgot was that I've survived worse than their laughter. The plan unfolded in pieces, like a puzzle I was never meant to solve. They spoke in fragments, in code, and in whispers they assumed my old ears couldn't catch. But I hear more than they think. Years of raising a son alone while working double shifts taught me to listen between the lines. One morning, while watering the poinsettias, I heard Jenna say, "She won't even notice at first." She was on speakerphone, too impatient to care that I was in the next room. "Yeah, we just leave her there, then later we post the reaction. It'll be iconic," Brianna replied. They forgot that sound travels through thin walls and old wood. This house has heard every secret my family has tried to bury. I paused, hand midair, the watering can feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. "Leave her there." The words echoed in my chest like a church bell. Jenna noticed I'd gone quiet and glanced at me, then quickly walked into the dining room, lowering her voice. I followed slowly, pretending to be busy with the tablecloth. From the reflection in the glass cabinet, I saw her pacing, phone pressed close to her lips. "Relax. It's just a prank," she hissed. "I've seen pranks. I've also seen psychological abuse. There's a thin line between them." Later, Mark walked in with that guilty posture again, eyes darting around like he was looking for an exit. "Mom, how would you feel about a little Christmas adventure?" he asked. I smiled softly, as if the idea amused me. At my age, every trip is an adventure, I answered, chuckling. He swallowed hard. Jenna booked this cabin. We'll all go together. It'll be fun, a change of scenery.
Cabin.
Fun. Change of scenery. Those words sounded less like an invitation and more like a setup. Still, I nodded. If that's what you want, dear. I wasn't always this quiet, you know. Once upon a time, I was the woman who ran an entire crisis unit in a city hospital. I handled emergencies, domestic violence cases, abandoned elders, people thrown away by their own families. I learned how abandonment begins, with jokes, then with justifications, then with silence. So when I heard the tone in Jenna's voice, when I saw the avoidance in Mark's eyes, I recognized the pattern. But I also knew something else. People like Jenna always underestimate who they're dealing with, especially when that person is a grandmother who doesn't understand technology. They don't realize our generation invented half the things they misuse. That evening, I took out my old phone from the drawer. Not the smartphone Mark had bought me that I never learned to use. The other one. The one I'd kept from my days at the hospital, with a simple interface and a very reliable recorder. I charged it, sat on my bed, and listened to the low hum of the house around me. I knew there would be a moment to capture, a moment when their intentions would slip out in full. All I had to do was be patient and let them talk. They were planning a game. They forgot I used to be very good at strategy. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in cold gray skies and fake cheer. Jenna and her friends clattered around the house in boots and glittery sweaters, smelling of perfume and cheap champagne. Mark loaded bags into the car, avoiding my gaze as if eye contact might burn him. I put on my red reindeer sweater, the same one they said looked a bit much last year. It didn't matter. It was mine. I slipped my old phone into my pocket, the recorder already on, silently absorbing every sound. "Ready, Evelyn?" Jenna asked, with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "More than you think," I replied. The car was cramped, loud with music and laughter that had nothing to do with joy. I sat in the back, squished between two of Jenna's friends who smelled like hairspray and peppermint. They shouted over each other, filming little videos for their social media. "Christmas cabin with the fam," one of them yelled into her phone, angling the camera so I was barely visible. Mark kept his eyes on the road, jaw clenched, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Relax, babe," Jenna said, patting his shoulder. "It'll be fine." Nothing good ever starts with someone saying relax. As we drove farther from the city, the roads narrowed and the houses thinned out. Snow dusted the fields like powdered sugar on a cake, beautiful and indifferent. "Remember the plan?" Brianna whispered from my right side, thinking I couldn't hear over the music. Jenna giggled. "She'll be fine. People leave their grandparents in worse places." My heart tightened, but not with fear, more with a familiar anger. I'd seen too many elders abandoned for real, left in hospitals with fake phone numbers. Compared to that, this was a performance.
Cruel, yes, but staged.
And that meant I had room to move. After nearly an hour, we pulled up to a small roadside Christmas village set up near an old church. Lights twinkled, carolers sang, and a few stalls sold hot chocolate and ornaments. It was charming in a manufactured kind of way. Mark parked the car and turned around, finally looking me in the eye. "We'll just stretch our legs a bit, Mom," he said quietly. His eyes were wet, and in that moment I saw the little boy who used to cling to my hand in crowded malls. The boy was still there, buried under a man who'd forgotten how to say no. We all stepped out, and the cold air slapped my cheeks awake. Jenna looped her arm through mine, too tightly, guiding me toward the little square of lights. "Isn't this cute?" she said loudly. "You can walk around, maybe get some hot chocolate." I nodded, eyes scanning, mind sharp as a scalpel. "Thank you, dear." "How thoughtful," I answered. Behind us, I heard doors opening, closing, hushed laughter. I didn't turn around. I knew what was happening. They thought they were sneaking away. They didn't know I'd already hit record. I walked slowly toward the small stall selling hot chocolate, feeling the crunch of gravel under my boots. The air smelled of cinnamon and burned sugar, the kind of scent that usually warms a person from the inside. But that day, it only highlighted the cold gathering in my chest. I bought a cup, wrapped my hands around it, and pretended to be absorbed in the decorations. Behind me, I heard footsteps shuffle, car doors slam softly, and then voices. "Go, go, go," someone whispered. The engine started. I didn't turn. Not yet. The car pulled away, tires crunching on the icy ground. I stood there, listening as the sound faded into the distance. Only then did I let myself look back. The parking spot where Mark had parked was empty, a rectangle of flattened gravel and ghost tire tracks. For a second, the world went quiet, as if even the wind held its breath. No one else seemed to notice that an old woman had just been left behind. People bustled around, children tugged at their parents' coats, and carols floated through the air. Life went on, as it always does, indifferent to private tragedies. I took a long sip of hot chocolate, the sweetness almost making me laugh. So this is the joke, I murmured to myself. A few years ago, maybe this would have broken me. Back when my grief over Robert was fresh, when loneliness felt like a second skin. But abandonment loses its power when you've faced it before and survived. They thought they were stripping me of my dignity. They didn't realize they were stripping themselves of mine. And dignity, once surrendered by others, becomes a weapon in the hands of the one left standing. I walked over to a bench and sat down, taking out my old phone. The recorder icon blinked steadily, reassuringly. I rewound the last few minutes and pressed play, letting their own voices wash over me. "She'll be fine. We'll come back for her later." "Chill," Jenna's voice said, light and dismissive. "Make sure you're recording when she realizes," another friend snickered. My lips tightened into a thin line. They wanted a reaction video. They were going to get one, just not the kind they imagined. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel the hurt fully. The sting of betrayal from my own son's silence. The humiliation of being treated like a prop in someone else's entertainment. The loneliness of sitting on a bench at a fake Christmas village while my family drove away. Tears gathered in my eyes, but they didn't fall. Instead, they settled back, hardening into something sharper. I had spent my whole life turning pain into purpose. This would be no different. I pulled my coat tighter and stood up. Across the street, I noticed the familiar sign of a bus stop and, beside it, a taxi company's number posted on a faded board. They thought they'd left me helpless. They forgot I've been navigating this world alone for most of my life. I walked toward the taxi number, phone already in hand. If they wanted to play games at Christmas, I would simply choose a different board. And when I moved my piece, it would be checkmate. The taxi driver was a quiet man with kind eyes and a holiday pin on his jacket. He didn't ask many questions, but he did glance at me through the rearview mirror once or twice. "Rough night," he finally asked gently. I smiled faintly. "You could say that." I gave him my address, and we drove past glittering houses and glowing windows, each one a little story of its own. I wondered how many other people were alone inside them, abandoned in less obvious ways. That's the thing about cruelty, it often hides behind decorations and good intentions. I've seen it too many times to mistake it for anything else. As the car hummed along, my mind drifted back decades. Before I was just Mark's mom, or Evelyn, the old lady in the red sweater. I used to be a crisis counselor at a major hospital in the city. I handled cases that would turn most people's blood cold: neglect, abuse, abandonment. I saw children with bruises they couldn't explain and grandparents left in waiting rooms with no one coming back. I advocated for them, fought for them, filed reports, stood in courtrooms, and refused to be intimidated. I was their voice when their own families erased them. I learned exactly what it looked like when people stopped seeing someone as human. I met Jenna when she was still playing perfect girlfriend. Back then, she called me Mom and brought me flowers on Mother's Day. She asked about my life, my stories, my memories of raising Mark. But over time, the word Mom became Evelyn, and questions turned into critiques. "You shouldn't eat that, Evelyn. It's bad for your heart." "Maybe you should sit this one out, Evelyn," It's too late for you to be out. Small comments, always packaged as concern. Control, wearing the mask of care. Mark changed too, though more slowly. He started defending her little digs as jokes or misunderstandings. He'd say things like, "Jenna didn't mean it like that," even when she clearly did. I watched my son sink into the soft pressure of a relationship built on subtle domination. But I stayed quiet because mothers are always warned not to interfere. We're told to be grateful if we're allowed a seat at the table at all. What they forget is, we built that table. And in my case, I paid for the house it sits in. When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked different in the dark, empty and expectant. No car. No music. No lights from the living room. It was as if the house itself knew something had shifted. I paid the driver, tipped him more than he expected, and wished him a sincere Merry Christmas. Inside, I turned on the tree lights, letting the soft glow fill the room. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle. Then I walked to my bedroom, sat at my desk, and took out a folder I hadn't opened in years. In it were documents, the deed to the house, financial accounts, my will, and an old letter from Robert. He'd written, "If anyone ever forgets who you are, remind them." I smiled sadly at his handwriting. "They forgot, Robert," I whispered. "But I'm going to remind them." I opened my laptop, connected my old phone, and transferred the recordings. Their voices, their laughter, their plans, it was all there, lined up in digital clarity. They wanted content. I was about to give them consequences. The first thing I did was back up everything. I might be old, but I know better than to keep important evidence in only one place. I copied the audio files to a USB stick, then another, then uploaded them to a cloud account Mark didn't even know I had. Old women are always underestimated when it comes to technology. That's one of our greatest advantages. They think we only know how to use remotes and microwaves. They forget we learned how to adapt long before apps existed. Next, I printed a transcript of the most incriminating parts. The printer hummed in the quiet house, spitting out their words in black and white. "Just leave her there. She'll be fine. We'll film it when she freaks out. Instant views." I read each line slowly, feeling my anger sharpen into something clean, something purposeful. This wasn't just a prank. It was a public execution of my dignity for their entertainment. That difference mattered. I laid the pages on the dining table, smoothing them out like a tablecloth. Then I took out the deed to the house and placed it beside them. My name, Evelyn M. Carter, was in bold letters at the top. Not Mark's. Certainly not Jenna's. This house, the one they paraded their friends through as if it were theirs, belonged entirely to me. Paid off with years of overtime shifts and skipped vacations while raising my son alone. They'd been living here out of my generosity, not entitlement. I brewed myself some chamomile tea and sat at the head of the table. The same seat I'd occupied at every holiday since Mark was born. I imagined Jenna and her friends laughing in some rented cabin, making toasts, filming themselves acting wild. Somewhere in their minds, they were already rehearsing their fake apologies. "We didn't think you'd take it so seriously. It was just a harmless joke. I'm sorry you felt that way." Apologies that centered their intentions, never my experience. I decided I wouldn't give them the chance to rewrite the story. When they walked through that door, they would be walking into a scene already set. The house would be warm and lit, the tree glowing, the documents spread out like a lesson plan. All I needed to do was wait. Time, at my age, is both an enemy and an ally. But on that night, it sat quietly beside me, patient and steady. I went to bed with the tree still on, a soft halo of light keeping vigil in the living room. Before I slept, I whispered a small prayer, not for them, but for myself. "Let me be strong, Robert," I murmured. "And let me be clear. I wasn't seeking revenge for the sake of cruelty. I was seeking justice, boundaries, and a reminder of who I am." They thought they'd left an old woman behind in a parking lot. They had actually created the perfect moment for that old woman to reclaim her power. And I intended to use it. It was well past midnight when I heard the car pull into the driveway. The laugh I'd recognize anywhere, Jenna's, cut through the quiet night. Their footsteps were loud and careless, boots scraping against the porch. I sat at the dining table, back straight, hands folded, the documents spread neatly in front of me. The tree lights flickered softly, casting shadows on the walls like silent witnesses. The front door opened, and cold air rushed in along with them. They sounded surprised to see the lights on. "Mom," Mark called out, hesitant. "In here," I answered, my voice calm and steady. They walked into the dining room, Christmas glitter still clinging to their hair and clothes. Jenna stopped first, eyes sweeping over the table. Her smile flickered, then froze. "What's all this?" she asked, forcing a laugh. Brianna shifted uncomfortably behind her, and another friend muttered something under her breath. Mark looked from the papers to my face, color draining from his. In that instant, he knew something had gone terribly wrong. I gestured to the chairs. "Sit," I said gently. It wasn't a request. Mark obeyed first, sinking into the seat across from me like a defendant in a courtroom. Jenna sat beside him, her friends hovering near the doorway, suddenly unsure if they wanted to be part of this scene. "You're home late," I began. "Did the drive back from your little cabin adventure take longer than expected?" Jenna opened her mouth, then closed it again. They hadn't told me where they were going. They hadn't thought I'd ever find out. I reached over and tapped the first stack of papers. "This," I said, "is a transcript of a conversation that took place earlier today. In the car, to be precise." I picked up the pages and began to read. "Just leave her there. She'll be fine. We'll come back for her later." Every word I spoke hung in the air like icicles, sharp and cold. Brianna blanched. "You recorded us?" she blurted out. I looked up slowly.
Yes.
I did. I met Jenna's eyes. "You wanted to see my reaction, didn't you?" Silence crashed over the room. Mark swallowed hard, his hands trembling on the table. "Mom, he started. A joke." I finished for him, raising an eyebrow. "Abandoning your 72-year-old mother on Christmas Eve is your idea of a joke?" Jenna shifted in her seat, her face twisting with defensiveness. "We were coming back," she snapped. "You were never in danger." I held her gaze, unblinking. "The danger wasn't physical, Jenna. It was moral." I placed the recording device on the table and pressed play. Their own voices filled the room, mocking, dismissive, gleeful. They flinched hearing themselves exposed without the cushion of context or intention. Instant views. Wait till she freaks out. She doesn't even know how to use her phone properly. When the audio ended, the silence that followed was heavier than any words they could have offered. I let it sit there between us, thick and undeniable. They wanted content. Now they were forced to consume it. I slid another document forward. The deed to the house. "This is the home where you planned your little Christmas prank," I said softly. "Do you know whose name is on this paper?" No one answered, but they didn't need to. I tapped the line that bore my full name.
Mine.
Not Mark's. Not Jenna's. Mine. I watched Jenna's jaw clench, her eyes narrowing as if the paper itself had insulted her. "You've been living here out of my generosity," I continued. "Not because you're entitled to it." Mark ran a hand over his face. "Mom, please," he whispered. "I'm not saying this to humiliate you, Mark," I replied. "I'm saying this so you understand the gravity of what you chose to be part of." I turned to Jenna. "You brought your friends into my home. You planned to use me as a prop in your little holiday spectacle." I glanced at her friends, who now looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them. "And you did it all while treating this place as if it were yours to do with as you pleased." I shook my head slowly. "That ends tonight," Jenna scoffed, folding her arms. "What are you going to do, Evelyn? Kick us out on Christmas?" There it was, the real Jenna. I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely calm. "I'm not cruel," I said. "You'll have time to make other arrangements. But yes, you'll be leaving this house." Mark stared at me, stunned. "Mom, you can't be serious." "Can I not?" I replied, tilting my head. "I was serious when I worked overtime to buy this house. I was serious when I opened my door to you both. And I am very serious now when I say I will not share my home with people who treat me as disposable. One of Jenna's friends whispered, "This is insane," under her breath. I turned to her, my voice still calm.
No, dear.
Do you know what's insane? Leaving a 72-year-old woman alone in a parking lot as part of a joke. I held her gaze until she dropped her eyes. I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. Quiet truth has a way of roaring all on its own. I pointed to the printed transcript. You did this. I'm simply responding. Mark's eyes filled with tears. Where are we supposed to go? He asked, voice cracking. I softened for a moment because he was still my son. You make decent money, Mark. You'll find somewhere. I paused. You just won't be doing it while standing on my back. Jenna opened her mouth to argue again, but I raised a hand. Don't, I said firmly. The more you talk, the more you reveal. And I've heard enough for a lifetime. I pushed the deed toward me again, reclaiming it. For the first time in years, I felt like the owner of more than just a house. I felt like the owner of my life again. After her initial burst of defiance, Jenna retreated into simmering silence. She left the room with her friends, muttering something about needing air. The front door closed behind them, leaving me alone with Mark and the low hum of the tree lights. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was almost like the nights when he was a teenager, coming home late and full of half-truths. He stared at the table, his shoulders slumped, his hands empty. Mom, he began, then stopped. The word hung there, fragile and heavy. I took a deep breath. Mark, look at me, I said. He did, and I saw shame swimming in his eyes like storm clouds. I'm not asking if you thought it was funny, I said softly. I'm asking why you didn't stop it. He swallowed.
I didn't know how, he said.
That's not true, I replied quietly. Years ago, when you were 5, you stood between me and a neighbor who was yelling at me over a parking space. You didn't know what the argument was about, but you knew I was upset. You told him to leave your mom alone. I paused, remembering the tiny boy with fire in his eyes, his little fists clenched. You knew how to protect me then, I continued. So, what happened? He winced, shame twisting his features. Jenna said it was just a joke. She said I was overreacting, that I'm always too sensitive when it comes to you, he murmured. I nodded slowly. So you chose her comfort over my dignity. He flinched at the words, but he didn't deny them. Sometimes, a wound has to be named before it can heal. Do you know how many abandoned elderly people I've worked with, Mark? I asked. He shook his head, a tear finally escaping down his cheek. Too many, I said. And do you know what their stories all had in common? It never started with a big decision. It started small, with people thinking, it's not that bad, it's just this one time. I leaned forward. Tonight, you helped rehearse a future where I could have been one of them. He covered his face with his hands. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice breaking. I know, I said. But apologies don't undo actions. They don't erase what you allowed to happen. He looked up at me, desperate. What can I do? I held his gaze. You can grow up, I answered. You can learn to set boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. You can remember that loyalty to your spouse doesn't mean sacrificing your conscience. And you can decide, right now, what kind of man you are going to be. He nodded slowly, but I could see the battle inside him. Love is complicated when it's tied up in fear and habit. I don't want to lose you, he said. You already started to lose me the moment you looked away in that parking lot, I replied. But I'm willing to see who you become after this. I stood up, my knees aching but my back straight. For now, I'm going to bed, I said. We'll talk more in the morning. As I walked away, I knew something had shifted between us. Whether it would break us or remake us remained to be seen. Christmas morning came dressed in quiet. No excited footsteps in the hallway, no clatter of rushed breakfast, no music from Jenna's phone. Just the soft ticking of the old wall clock and the faint hum of the heater. I got up, wrapped myself in my robe, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. The house felt suspended between two worlds, the one we'd been living in, and the one I'd just set into motion. As the coffee brewed, I watched snow drifting lazily past the window, settling on the hedges like a clean slate. Maybe that's what this day would become for me. Not a symbol of abandonment, but of beginning again. Mark came into the kitchen slowly, like a man approaching a confessional. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Morning, Mom," he said, voice hoarse. I nodded toward the other mug I'd set out. "Coffee." He accepted it with a quiet thank you, cradling the cup like something breakable. For a moment, we stood there in silence. I let him sit with his thoughts before I spoke. Sometimes, the deepest truths need space before they can surface. "Where's Jenna?" I asked eventually.
He sighed.
"At a hotel with her friends. She said she needed to be around people who aren't trying to ruin Christmas." My eyebrows lifted slightly.
Ah.
"So I ruined Christmas by refusing to play the victim in her little show." He didn't answer, which was answer enough. "I'm not surprised," I said calmly. "People like Jenna often mistake consequences for cruelty." He set his mug down and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "She thinks you're overreacting," he said. "What do you think, Mark?" I asked quietly. He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling. "I think," he began slowly, "I think I've been pretending not to see things for a long time." I nodded. "Pretending not to see is easier than facing what you might have to change," I said. "But that pretending has a cost. Last night, you saw the bill." We carried our coffee into the dining room, where the documents still lay on the table. I'd left them there on purpose. Truth shouldn't be hidden away once it has been revealed. I sat at the head again, and he sat across from me. "I meant what I said last night," I told him. "You and Jenna will need to find another place to live." He swallowed hard but didn't argue this time. "I know," he said quietly. "I think it's time I stand on my own feet anyway." I studied his face, searching for the boy I raised. He was still there, bruised by his own choices, but not beyond repair. "Mark," I said, "I love you. That will never change." He nodded, tears pooling again. "But love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure," I continued. "I refuse to disappear so that the two of you can feel more comfortable." He wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. "I don't want you to disappear, Mom," he said. "Then don't ask me to," I replied. It was late afternoon when Jenna finally came back. The sound of her car in the driveway was sharp, impatient. She walked in without knocking, her coat still on, her face flushed with anger. Behind her, the house felt even quieter, as if holding its breath again. She looked at the documents on the table, then at me, then at Mark. "So this is it," she snapped. "We're really doing this dramatic old lady meltdown thing on Christmas?" I folded my hands, refusing to be baited. "Good afternoon, Jenna," I said calmly. "Would you like some coffee?" She rolled her eyes. "No, I don't want coffee. I want to understand why you're trying to destroy this family over a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I repeated softly. "Is that what you call abandoning me as a joke?"
She scoffed.
"You weren't abandoned. We were coming back." I tilted my head. How long does someone have to be left alone before you consider it abandonment? Mark cleared his throat, but Jenna shot him a glare. "Don't start, Mark. You said it yourself. She's blowing this out of proportion," she said. He hesitated, then surprised both of us. "No, Jenna," he said quietly. "She's not." The room went prickly with tension. Jenna's eyes widened. "Oh, so now you're on her side?" she demanded. He didn't look away this time. "I'm on the side of what's right," he said. She turned her fury back to me. "You manipulated him," she accused. "You're using your age and your hurt feelings to control him." I let out a slow breath, something between a sigh and a soft laugh. "Jenna, I don't need to manipulate anyone. Your own words and actions have done all the work for me." I gestured to the papers. "These are your words. This is your laughter. Your plan." I simply refused to pretend it was anything else. She glanced at the transcript, then quickly looked away, like it burned her. "You recorded us without consent," she snapped. "That's messed up." "What's more messed up?" I asked. Recording someone who's plotting to humiliate you, or plotting to humiliate a 72-year-old woman and calling it content. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, jaw working. People who live in performance rarely know what to do when the audience stops clapping. I could see her scrambling for a new script and finding none. I stood up slowly, letting the movement command the room. "Jenna, I don't hate you," I said. "I don't wish you harm. But I do wish you distance from me, from this house, from any further opportunity to treat me like a toy." She stared at me, stunned. "So that's it? You're kicking us out?" "Yes," I replied. "Not out of pettiness. Out of self-respect." I paused. "You and Mark have 30 days to find a new place. Until then, we will be civil. But after that, this house will be mine again, in more than just name." After Jenna stormed off to their room, slamming the door behind her, the house vibrated with unspoken words. I could have let them linger, but I'd spent too many years swallowing what needed to be said. So I knocked on their door an hour later. There was a pause, then a sharp, "What?" from inside. "It's Evelyn," I said. Another pause, then the door opened a crack. Jenna's eyes were red, whether from anger or tears, I couldn't tell. "Can I come in?" I asked. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. Their room, the one that used to be Mark's childhood bedroom, looked smaller with all their things crammed into it. Clothes, makeup, boxes, gadgets, evidence of a life that had grown too big for borrowed space. I sat on the edge of the chair by the window, while she remained standing, arms crossed. "I'm not here to argue," I began. She rolled her eyes slightly, but didn't interrupt. "I'm here to say things I should have said a long time ago." "You don't like me," she said bluntly. It wasn't a question. I considered that for a moment. "I don't like how you treat me," I answered. "That's different." She snorted. "Same thing." "No," I replied gently. "If you treated me with basic respect, Jenna, I could live the rest of my life never fully understanding you and still be at peace. But disrespect turns differences into battlefields." Her posture softened ever so slightly. "You've been competing with me since I married Mark," she said. "You act like I stole him." I shook my head. I raised him to love deeply. I expected him to love a partner fiercely someday. That was never the problem. I looked up at her. "The problem is that you seem to believe that in order to be important, you have to erase everyone who came before you." She blinked, caught off guard. I continued. "Love isn't a pie with limited slices. His love for you doesn't require the elimination of his love for me." I sighed. "But you've treated me like a threat instead of an ally. Every holiday, every decision, has felt like a test I was supposed to fail, so you could justify pushing me further away." Her eyes glistened, defenses cracking just a little. "I didn't mean," she began. "Yes," I interrupted gently. "You did. Maybe not consciously all the time. But intent does not erase impact." Silence stretched between us. "I know things about you, Jenna," I said softly. "How you grew up. How your own mother dismissed you. How she made you feel small." She looked startled. "Mark told you." "Not everything," I replied. "But I see patterns. I used to work with families for a living, remember?" Her shoulders slumped. "I'm so afraid of being nothing," she whispered. "So, I try to control everything." I nodded slowly. "I understand the fear," I said. "But hurting others to protect yourself is a choice. And you've made that choice with me more than once." I stood up, letting the moment settle. "I hope one day you get help and heal what's underneath all this," I added. "But I won't be your practice target anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't step forward to comfort her. Sometimes compassion means stepping back, not closer. I walked to the door, pausing only once. "Who I used to be," I said quietly, "is a woman who helped people break cycles. I'm starting with myself." Over the next few days, the energy in the house was strange, like we were living in two realities at once. On the surface, we moved through practical tasks, phone calls, searches for apartments, packing boxes. Underneath, there was grief, resentment, fear, and a quiet flicker of something else, relief. I found myself walking through the rooms and seeing them differently. Not as spaces I was slowly being pushed out of, but as places I was reclaiming. I touched the walls Robert had painted, the shelves we'd installed together on a hot summer afternoon. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I dug through old photo albums, not out of nostalgia, but to remind myself of the journey. There I was, younger, holding baby Mark in my arms, dark circles under my eyes but a fierce light in my gaze. There I was at the hospital, surrounded by colleagues, file folders in hand, that same fire in my posture. I remembered late nights in emergency rooms, standing up to doctors who dismissed women's pain, calling out families who tried to abandon their elders quietly. I'd been brave then. Somewhere along the way, I had assumed I no longer needed that bravery. Last Christmas proved me wrong. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and pen. I began to write. Not a will, but a list. All the things I forgot about myself. I titled it. I wrote, I am capable. I am observant. I am not a burden. I am a person. I am not lucky to have a place in my son's life. He is also lucky to have a mother who loves him. I have the right to boundaries, even at 72. Sometimes, we need to see our truths in ink before we can fully believe them. Mark came in and saw the notebook. What's that? He asked. Homework, I said with a small smile. For who? He asked. For me, I replied. He sat down across from me, nervous but trying. I've been looking for apartments, he said. I believe you, I answered. He hesitated. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Were you always this strong? He asked quietly. I chuckled softly. No, I said. I became this strong because life demanded it. Grief demanded it. Motherhood demanded it. And now, apparently, old age demands it too. He looked at me with a mixture of admiration and sadness. I wish I'd seen it sooner, he said. I wish you had too, I replied gently. But seeing it now is better than never. A week after the incident, the house looked different again. Boxes labeled Mark and Jenna line the hallway, stacked neatly like punctuation marks at the end of a long sentence. The tree was still up, but the ornaments I'd added, the handmade ones, the slightly crooked stars, made it feel more like mine again. I'd received a call from an old colleague who invited me to a Christmas gathering at a community center for seniors and volunteers. There would be food, music, and people whose stories might mirror mine. For the first time in a long time, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. On the day of the event, I put on my red sweater once more. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not just an old woman, but a survivor, a professional, a mother, a whole person. I grabbed my coat and my bag, then paused in the hallway. Mark was in the living room, sealing another box. Going out? He asked. Yes, I said. Some old friends, some new faces. I thought I'd spend Christmas with people who see me. He nodded, swallowing. Can I drive you? He asked. I considered for a moment. Yes, I said finally. Thank you. On the ride there, the silence between us was softer, less brittle. We both knew things would never be exactly the same. But maybe that wasn't all bad. Sometimes relationships have to break a little to stop bending in the wrong direction. When we arrived, he parked and turned to me. Mom, he said, I'm really trying to change. I looked at him, seeing the sincerity beneath the fear. I know, I replied. Change is a process, Mark. Just don't stop halfway when it gets uncomfortable. He nodded, eyes shining. Will you call me later? He asked. I will, I said. Then I stepped out of the car and walked toward the building, my step steady, my heart strangely light. Inside, warm light and laughter greeted me. People were singing carols off-key, sharing stories, passing plates of cookies. I joined a table and was soon talking to a woman my age who had her own stories of difficult daughters-in-law and complicated sons. We laughed. We shook our heads. We shared knowing looks. I realized I wasn't alone. Not in my experiences, not in my choices. That realization felt like a gift wrapped in honesty. For the first time in years, Christmas felt like it belonged to me again. A few days after Christmas, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Jenna stood there alone, her posture smaller than I'd ever seen it. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her eyes were tired, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. "Yes," I said. "Come in." We sat in the living room, the tree now stripped of ornaments, waiting to be taken down. It felt symbolic somehow, a season ending, something new preparing to begin. She stared at her hands, then took a deep breath. "I talked to a therapist," she blurted out. I raised my eyebrows. "Oh." She nodded. "Online session," she added quickly, as if that made it less real. "She said I have issues with control, with feeling insignificant. She said I project that onto you." I listened, saying nothing, giving her space. "I'm not going to pretend I suddenly understand everything," she continued. "But I see now that what we did was cruel. Not funny. Not even close." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and this time she didn't hide them. "It was like you weren't real to me," she whispered. "Like you were just scenery." Her words were brutal in their honesty, but they were true. And truth, even when ugly, is better than polished lies. "I can't undo what I did," she said. "I can't ask you to trust me again right away. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For real this time." I studied her, seeing the same woman but also a crack in the armor. "I appreciate that you're starting to see it," I said slowly. "But you're right. Trust isn't restored by a single conversation. It's rebuilt by consistent behavior over time." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I know," she said. "I just didn't want you to think I feel nothing." I leaned back, letting my shoulders relax. "Jenna, I don't think you feel nothing," I replied. "I think you feel so much that you panic and try to control everything around you to avoid feeling small again." Her eyes widened, then softened. "That's exactly what the therapist said," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "We old ladies know a few things too," I said. She let out a short, broken laugh. "I understand if you still want us to move out," she said. "I'm not here to negotiate that." "You do need to move out," I said gently. "For your sake as much as mine. You and Mark need your own space, your own responsibilities. You both need to grow without using me as a crutch or a target." She nodded, accepting it, even if it hurt. "Maybe someday we can have Christmas together again," she said quietly. "On different terms," I answered. "Maybe." The day Mark and Jenna finally moved out, the house felt oddly bigger. Not emptier, just more mine. Their boxes left grooves in the carpet, but I knew those would fade with time. I stood in the doorway as they carried the last of their things to the car. Mark hugged me tightly, longer than he had in years. "I'll call you tonight," he said. "I'll be here," I replied. Jenna gave me a small, hesitant nod. "Thank you for not giving up on him," she said softly. After they drove away, I went back inside and closed the door gently. The silence that followed was peaceful rather than heavy. I walked through each room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the tops of picture frames, the cool metal of doorknobs. This wasn't just a house, it was a lifetime. A lifetime I had every right to live on my own terms. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the late winter light stretch across the yard. I felt tired, but it was the good kind of tired, like after finishing something important. I thought about that night at the Christmas village, sitting alone with a cup of hot chocolate as my family drove away laughing. They had believed that moment defined me. The abandoned old woman, the punchline, the one who didn't belong. But they were wrong. That moment didn't define me. It revealed them. What defined me was what I did next. I got up. I went home. I chose myself. People will tell you that getting older means becoming weaker, quieter, easier to push aside. But the truth is, age strips away the illusions. You stop having the energy to maintain lies, especially the ones you tell yourself. I had spent years shrinking to make myself easier to bear, so no one would call me difficult or dramatic. But this Christmas, They force me to remember who I used to be. A woman who fought for people no one else saw. A woman who refused to let abandonment have the last word. So, when I tell you my daughter-in-law and her friends thought it would be funny to abandon me on Christmas, understand this. They didn't just misjudge my fragility. They misjudged my history. They forgot that I used to stand beside people on the worst days of their lives and help them choose themselves. They forgot that I learned how to stand alone a long time ago. In trying to erase me, they only helped me redraw myself in bolder lines. I am Evelyn. I am old. And I am not to be left behind.